Appreciate it, Bill. Yeah, just fired up like always. We get to this final game, and man, I don't know if we could have asked for much more in the semifinals with the way those games played out. Michigan and TCU going back and forth. Looked like Michigan might find a way to pull it out late, and then to the credit of TCU, the way they've done it all year, they once again win a game late, which has kind of been their theme all year. And then with Ohio State and Georgia, man, Ohio State off of that Michigan game, I don't know if they could have executed any better in most areas. And with the way Ryan Day was calling it, and with the way CJ Stroud was playing. But again, credit to Georgia, heart of a champion up against the ropes, and just made enough plays there late to be able to get an opportunity to repeat, something you just don't see very often in this sport. So fired up to be here. I went home after the Rose Bowl and came back today, and fired up for Monday night and all the build up and the hype to get us ready.
Kirk, before we get to questions, one more from me. You called an NFL game earlier this year with your busy schedule at SoFi. What are your thoughts on SoFi hosting its first national championship game? Yeah,
I obviously watched it, especially last year when the Rams were on a big run and then ended up in the Super Bowl. I'm an idiot. I thought it was, a dome until I got there this year, and it's the most unique setup that the architects did when you see it in person. It's fantastic. It's got to be, along with, I don't know, whatever other NFL stadium you want to put out there, state-of-the-art facility. But it'll be, I think, for fans that come out here, even though there's some wind and rain, even though it's sunny out right now, I think people will be fired up to have a chance to get in the stadium, and what better setting than SoFi for the national title. It'll be great.
Thanks. We'll start with media questions. We'll go with Paul Newberry in Atlanta, followed by Matt Baker at the Tampa Bay Times. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi, Kirk. How you doing?
Good.
A couple from me. First of all, a little over a year ago at this time, Georgia had lost in the SEC championship, and there were a lot of people calling for Kirby Smart to make a quarterback change, go back to JT Daniels. Stetson Bennett can't win a national title. I'm just curious, looking back on that, what does that Kirby's decision to stick with Stetson kind of say about Kirby and what he's done with this program, and kind of his confidence and making tough decisions, and just kind of I don't know, that seems to kind of epitomize sort of what he's done to build Georgia into kind of this new dynasty in college football.
Without a doubt. I think what an opportunity they have Monday to kind of be the new bar in the sport, if they're not already. Kirby's created a very consistent brand. The decision on Stetson, he'll be the first one to tell you, and I'm sure he's told you, Paul, this because he's pretty open about it, that he and all the offensive coaches kind of struggled with the idea of him being the guy last year, and really was hoping JT Daniels would get healthy and get back and be the guy to lead them to wherever they were going last year. And all Stetson Bennett did was keep making plays. And like you said, he came up short in Atlanta. I didn't realize that there were a lot of people questioning if he was the guy at that point. I thought that was more middle of the year. But regardless, whenever the decision was made and however much noise was on the outside of the program, the little guy just kept battling and kept making plays. And I think even the coaches kind of threw their hands up in the air and said, man, this guy gives us our best chance to win. And I think last year in that championship game against Alabama, that second half, I mean, they went from like, oh gosh, what are we going to do, to put the ball in his hands. And I don't want to say he won it for him, but I know his playmaking ability and a lot of those throws late in that game had a lot to do with how they won that game. And then he comes back this year as kind of a seasoned veteran, and I think now he's kind of the face of the offense of the program. So it's incredible, the journey. You could honestly write a movie script on his story. I'm excited to see if he gets an opportunity to write this final chapter the way he wants. But it's been a lot of fun to watch this guy against all odds, proving everybody, including his own coaches and his own fans, wrong, to the point of potentially winning back-to-back national titles. But for me personally, as a college football nut, I'll never forget, what he's done and how he had to prove people wrong along the way.
One more for me too, with TCU being in this, there was kind of a thought that the championship game had become kind of stale or was stale. The same teams in it every year, a few SEC powerhouses, Clemson and Ohio State. How much excitement do you think it brings having somebody like TCU in this game? And do you think we could see more of this when we go to the 12-team playoff?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's great to have a new face and especially their story where they were 5-7. They fired their coach. They brought in they didn't fire him. He stepped down. They brought in a new coach and really across town from SMU. And here he is in his first year. And by the way, I'm sure you've looked at it. I mean, there's 5 or 6 different games that a lot of people thought, okay, that's a fun story. They're gone. And they just kept finding a way to win games and coming back. And of course, the grand fashion was the game against Baylor, last second walk-off field goal. That's kind of symbolic of their season, really. And even against Michigan, a kind of a back and forth game. So not only just a new face, but their story and what they had to do to get here. And man, it just doesn't seem that long ago. TCU was in the Mountain West and trying to get respect from people around the country. And they had an opportunity to play against Wisconsin in the Rose Bowl, and obviously took full advantage of that. And I think that really helped their brand that day. And then eventually to join the Big 12, and a lot of people still don't respect them. And then to have this year, I think a lot of people, if you really taking a poll with Georgia fans, they don't know a whole lot about TCU. So to me, that's fun, because they're not going to back down, I assure you, and they're incredibly confident. And I think it's going to be a great game. And to answer your second question, yeah, I think with the 12-team playoff, I think there's definitely an opportunity, not only to obviously see new faces, but for teams like TCU to potentially make a run to get into the big stage like this.
We'll go to Matt Baker next, followed by John Lewis. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, Kirk, I appreciate the time. Obviously, Georgia and TCU, their rosters are built differently, and TCU is maybe more involved in the portal than anybody that's been at this stage in the playoff era. How do you kind of view TCU's roster makeup? Do you think that kind of more lean on the portal is a sustainable, viable model for other teams, or if TCU just kind of catch lightning in a bottle here?
Well, I think all of us are kind of learning, right? I mean, as we go along here, we saw Michigan State a couple years ago hit it big. We saw USC hit it big this year until the very end, where they lost the Pac-12 championship and lost their bowl game, but obviously had a great year from where they were the year before. So I think new coaches in new situations, the first 2 or 3 years, those are the guys that are really, I think, needing to flip their roster around. And what better way to do it? It's like the NFL with free agency. But I think your point is, for me, as I sit here just a couple years into this transfer portal, I think it's kind of like the NFL. You build longevity with the draft, and you build your foundation with the draft and in college football recruiting. But then if you need a right guard, or you need a safety, or you need a linebacker, you go into the portal and you pick some pieces. I think that's more sustainable. I think that's probably where people will eventually get. But these new coaches, and they inherit a roster. Maybe guys don't buy into their culture. Maybe they have a weakness at offensive line. What we're seeing is people go out and pick people up as quickly as they can to try to replenish a roster. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But I really think that the future of most programs is going to be still recruiting and still go through, kind of cherry picking and finding different guys that might meet the needs that you have.
Okay, we'll go to John Lewis, followed by Zach at the New York Post. Go ahead, John.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot for taking the time today, Kirk. Appreciate it. Just a question. You obviously now cover both the NFL and college football. There's been a lot of concern in college football circles about the NFL kind of encroaching on college football's territory, the Black Friday game starting next year that you'll actually be doing for Amazon. But also this past New Year's, January 2nd, because New Year's fell on a Sunday, you had an NFL game in that Sugar Bowl time slot. And it seems like the NFL overshadowed college football on one of its top days of the year, the least watched Rose Bowl ever, least watched Cotton Bowl in many years. As someone who covers both sports, do you think that this competition is going to maybe get to a point where college football is really kind of set back, kind of the way the NBA is on Christmas Day?
My hope, and I don't know all the answers to the logistics, but I do wish that there was a set date that was a little bit more fan friendly for college football. Like Saturday nights, like the national championship being on a Monday night. I know I hear from fans all the time how tough that is for people on the East Coast, to try to stay up on these games. And I've always heard about the NFL, and college football trying to be good partners, and the NFL in a perfect world would be respectful of what the college football traditional territory has been. I'd like to think that the league and the decision makers from college football could get on the same page as we move forward to this 12-team playoff. I don't know what the answers are, honestly, because like you said, the NFL seems to be growing, and looking for different time opportunities to show their product off. And they're the king, let's face it. I mean, in all sports, you throw the NBA, MLB, anything out there, and the NFL is clearly number one. I don't think college football, I don't know, you probably have researched it, John. I think college football is number two in this country. And I know as an avid fan of both the leagues or the sports, I would love to see them be able to work behind the scenes. I just feel that college football right now, who are the leaders? Who's making the decisions to ultimately try to have those kind of conversations? It's most definitely not the NCAA. I'm very anxious to see where our future goes as we get ready for this 12-team playoff, as we still wait for more realignment. There's so many unknowns right now in college football. John, we might have a commissioner like Roger Goodell. We might have, who knows, maybe that's our future. Maybe breaking away from the NCAA and creating its own governing body and creating its own world, and partnering with the Players Association and creating a CBA. If that is the future, which I don't know if it would be, because it's just such an unknown. So right now, I think it's just a mess. I think the sport of college football across the board is a mess in a lot of different areas. And I think trying to find one person to represent the sport, to talk on its behalf to Roger Goodell and the league, I don't know if that exists right now. So I think college football has to get their world kind of aligned and figure that out, and then figure out who the leader is, and then go forward with trying to find a way to partner with the NFL and try to work together on dates and times and things of that nature.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. We'll go to Zach at the New York Post, followed by George Somerville. Go ahead, Zach.
You just see someone's headline, Kirk Herbstreit says college football's a mess. Take it out of context.
Kirk, how are you?
Good.
So I had two things. First, I wanted to ask you, I was kind of trying to think back. I mean, can you ever remember a Cinderella quite like this? TCU, I mean, a team that didn't get a single vote in the preseason, was 5-7 last year, was, basically counted out all year, 8-point underdog in the semis. Now they're a 13.5-point underdog here. I mean, could you ever, I've been trying to think back, like, feels like in the last 25 years, we've never really had a story quite like this.
Not to this level. No. And I wish the Bear was on here. He could probably tell us off the top of his head who these big underdogs have been that make it, Cincinnati, of course, was in a semi, but not all the way to the title. I can't remember this big of underdog off the top of my head. I remember when Ohio State played Miami in 2002, they were a pretty big underdog, but they were still Ohio State, still with that big brand. So no, man, I really can't. And not to mention, if you go back, not just to this week, but you bring up a good point. If you go back to August, I mean, how many people were in Las Vegas saying, yeah, let me put $10 down on TCU, to win a national title. I don't know if anybody was, including their own fan base. So, and I mean, think of their story. Max Duggan is a guy that's been around for 4 years, and he doesn't even start with a new coaching staff. To start the season, to break camp, they go with Chandler Morris, and he gets dinged up, and they go back to Duggan. I mean, that gives you an idea of what they thought of Max Duggan, right? And then he becomes the leader and the face of this team and a Heisman finalist. So, yeah, this is a team that's kind of been against all odds all year, and don't tell them they don't have a chance Monday night. I mean, they actually tell them that. I think they like to hear it because it seems to fire them up. But if anybody does an article on how many 4 stars and 5 stars are on the 2 rosters, you would think, why are we even playing the game on Monday night? But as we all know, it's more about how a team comes together and what it ends up becoming. And TCU is a great example of that.
And my other thing is with Georgia. I mean, when you see them and kind of what they're now, have accomplished the last few years, do you see them almost as like a new? Do they remind you of what Alabama was?
Yeah,
I mean,
for sure. Not so much what Alabama was.
Well, I mean, they're still obviously great. I mean, but
I think Alabama's still Alabama. I know they've been off here or there a tick here. They lost the last play of the game to Tennessee, last play of the game to LSU. I'm still a huge believer in Nick Saban and Alabama, but I know what you're saying because I agree with you, and I do think that Georgia. I already feel that Georgia's right there. Now, if they win Monday night, game day travels all around the country, and these teams always say, we want Bama, we want Bama. They're going to have to update that to we want Georgia. I mean, Georgia is recruiting at as high level as anybody since Kirby's been there. Most importantly, they're developing players as well as anybody. To his credit, I think he learned a lot of this when he was a young coordinator. He's found a way to not take your foot off the gas. He's found a way to keep the motivation and find a way to get a chip on your shoulder and get pissed off at the world. The way teams that win all the time, it's unique to try to do that. It's hard because that's why we don't see teams repeat very often, because you just lose a little bit of an edge. And Georgia, man, how many times have they shown up flat over the last 2 or 3, 4 years? Sometimes they get beat, but it's not because they laid an egg or showed up flat. So no, Kirby is doing an amazing job. And I think most people that follow the sport on a national level would recognize that and definitely put him either equal to Bama, or if he wins Monday, yeah, like you said, he's the new standard in the sport.
Great. Thanks, Kirk.
Yep.
Okay, next we'll go to George, followed by Larry Snyder at WLS. Go ahead, George.
Hi, Kirk. Thanks for doing this. You touched a little bit on Max Duggan. Both quarterbacks have overcome significant adversity to get to where they are today. I hope you don't mind me saying, but you also had adversity in your college career. Can you talk to the mental toughness required to overcome these obstacles for student athletes?
Yeah, it's everybody has a different story. There's some guys that come in as a 5-star, they walk right on the field and play right away and go off to the NFL 3 years later. And that's not the norm, but it happens. I think most people have a story where they hit some adversity. That's why the transfer portal is such an interesting thing. I think it's good for people, and sometimes I wish guys would be willing to stay in there and kind of fight the fight and really grow and develop as a person. But I think everybody, not everybody, but again, going back to my earlier comment, I think most people face, whether it's playing time or it's an injury or it's something that prevents you from right away, or a better player ahead of you. Sometimes whatever it is, you face it, and either it's a great assistant coach, a position coach, a coordinator, a parent, high school coach, family members, whoever it might be. These guys go in with such pressure and such expectations that when they don't live up to those initially, I know it can be really hard for a lot of these guys, especially in this social media era that they live in. And yeah, I know from talking to guys every week that they rely on whoever their support staff is to help them get through, those tough times. It could even be a starter like CJ Stroud, who has a bad game, not even really a bad game, but the team has a bad game against Michigan. And then, you deal with it then. So I don't think you're ever immune to dealing with it. There's nothing you can ever do to protect yourself from it. You're going to have to learn to cope with adversity. And, these guys are no different today than they were, going back, in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's always kind of been the case. I think the difference is now the coverage and the attention on the sport. And of course, social media and how toxic that can be, that these guys have to be able to cope with.
All right, next is Larry Snyder, followed by Charles Baggerly. Go ahead, Larry.
Hey, Kirk, as to the game, watching the semifinal, the over-under for this game is around 62. Watching the semifinals, they may get that by halftime. But sometimes things are played a little tighter. Well, what's your take on that? As to what the game?
Man, I'm with you. I would see points. I think and Kirby, when we sat down with him leading into last week's game against Ohio State, we were asking him kind of the same subject, just about Ryan Day made it pretty clear that he thought he'd have to score in the mid-high 40s to win the game because of the respect he had for Georgia's offense. And I also think that Kirby brought up a good point about the wear and tear of a season and how you get a long layoff and how the tackling is always a concern, and how tough it is to stay sharp on the defensive side of the ball, for this kind of run. Now, maybe it'll be better because they just finally played a game last week. Maybe they'll be able to, make some corrections off of some of the mistakes that the defense has made. But I'm with you. I think these two quarterbacks, the style of offenses that they run, I see a lot of points. I think if you get a stop in this kind of game, I think it's a win. If you get a stop in the red area, it's a win. If you can get a punt, obviously it's a massive win, or a turnover. Because I see a lot of speed for TCU on the perimeter and in the backfield. I haven't heard the latest on Kendre Miller, if he's going to be able to go, but they've got great backs, even if he can't. And obviously they got speed at receiver. And this Georgia secondary, the last couple times out against LSU and Ohio State, they've been vulnerable. And here comes another team that can make you pay for that. So, and we always know what Georgia's capable of doing on the other side of the ball offensively. So yeah, I'm with you, man. I think it's a back and forth type of game with a lot of playmakers and a lot of speed and a lot of points.
Thanks.
Okay, now we'll go to Charles, and then we'll go to Liam at Minute Media. Go ahead, Charles.
What are your thoughts on Coach Dykes coming in and succeeding at this level in his first year? And also, how much credit does Gary Patterson deserve for the team's success right now?
Yeah, I think Gary, obviously, for what he did there, the recruiting that he did, the culture that he created, that Sonny Dykes inherited. Even though they didn't win a lot of games last year, he inherited a roster not full of guys that you would think were capable of winning a ton of games, but it was good character, good substance, good foundation. And then I think the timing of Sonny Dykes being in that area, knowing the players, learning the players pretty quickly, he credits his strength staff, for coming in and really getting after it, kind of set a new standard for the direction that they were going to go. Maybe some new juice, some new blood. I think maybe it was good for the returning players. But how much credit does Sonny Dykes deserve, or what can you say about the job that he did when they're TCU? Not just last year, in the last few years, they've had some decent games, but they just lack consistency. And to be able to have this kind of run is a major credit to Sonny Dykes, who I've known for a long time, going back to even before Cal, watching him as a young assistant. And he's got, I'm sure you've been around him, he's got a competitive spirit about him that most of these coaches have, and he's just got a way about him that I think relates to the current player. And so it's not shocking to me that he's doing well. A little bit surprising, I think, for all of us in his first year, and considering some of the obstacles they've had to overcome, that they're here in the national title. But you look at what he's already doing with the portal moving forward into next year. I don't think this is a one and done thing for TCU. I think Sonny Dykes has got something right now that's pretty unique, and I'm excited to see where it can go, not just Monday night, but moving forward after this.
Okay, we'll go to Liam next, followed by Matthew Loftus. Go ahead, Liam.
Hey, Kirk, appreciate you taking the time, man.
Sure.
You're going to be on the call with Chris Fowler again this Monday for the national championship game. You guys have had, obviously, a ton of experience with each other in the booth, and that kind of stands out to, you know, what you were doing this fall, building a partnership with Al Michaels for Amazon. Can you speak a little bit to the advantages that the kind of familiarity you have with Fowler gives you when you're in the booth, especially for a game like Monday's national championship game?
Yeah, it's a lot like probably, you know, your job, or if we're talking about football, you know, just the familiarity with your partner, the cadence of a broadcast, the you know, just the look of an eye. You know, you're looking at each other, might be an eyebrow raise, might just be little things that, you know, you sometimes hear quarterback and receivers talk about. They just kind of know each other. They kind of feel each other. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. I've been working with him on, you know, on game day. I worked with him for over 2 decades, and then on the Saturday night game, I've been working with him since 14. And so when you work with somebody for that much time and that many games, you just kind of, it becomes very natural, very comfortable. Something, you know, my first year with Al, it was very interesting to work Thursday night with Al, who's maybe the greatest to ever do it. And Fred Gaudelli was the producer. And Fred Gaudelli and Al go back to John Madden and then Chris Collinsworth. And so for me to kind of step in, not a new producer and a new play-by-play guy, but a producer and a play-by-play guy that had been together for a long time and done so many big events. And then to kind of step in line with them, it wasn't all of us learning something new. It was me kind of learning Al and Freddie. And that was a really, that was kind of a challenge within itself, not just calling the game. And then to leave that and then to go to Saturday, it was almost like going home. You know, when I would go to Saturday, it was very interesting to go through that. And then, you know, as I got more and more reps with Al, as we did, I think it ended up being, 15 or 16 games. You could just start to feel his rhythm and his cadence. And so, you know, I got more and more comfortable working with Al as well. So yeah, but getting back to Chris, without a doubt, I think all this time we've been together allows us to really feel one another and feed off of one another as well.
Thank you, Kurt. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Okay, we'll go to Matthew now, followed by Paul Livengood. Go ahead, Matthew.
Thanks for this, and thanks again for bringing instructions this week. I was wondering which team's Achilles heel is going to be most threatening to them winning the championship. I mean, we've seen both teams expose, also be exposed. Or one Rebels kick away as being Ohio State and TCU. So which team do you think has the biggest Achilles heel, and how would they run it?
Did that come through?
No, I'm sorry. I think I heard Achilles heel.
Yeah, like of the team's weaknesses, is there one that's more glaring than the other?
Well, I think that the biggest thing is going to be, Matthew, I'm sorry, man, we're just kind of cutting in and out there. I'll do the best I can. Hopefully it answers your question. The biggest concern I have for Georgia is going to be, can they get pressure on Duggan? Can they get to Duggan before that those wide receivers can make plays against the secondary, which is an obvious concern for Georgia, especially after the last couple games. You know, and I would have said against TCU, if you and I would have spoken before the TCU Michigan game, I thought, okay, like everybody else, man, how are they going to hold up at the line of scrimmage? You know, they don't have the biggest people at the line of scrimmage, especially on the defensive front. How are they going to be okay? But somebody forgot to tell D Winters and the TCU defense, and I know they ended up giving up some scores up, but I didn't look at it like, oh my gosh, they're getting blown off the ball. I didn't really sense that, that 3-3-5 that they play. I thought they were playing with their hair on fire, kind of anxious to show that they could stand up against the run. And Donovan Edwards got out early, but for the most part, I think Michigan made some plays through the air. And that would be my other concern for TCU is how do they match up also against Stetson Bennett, those tight ends, and even the receivers. So I think it's both teams are going to be able to have opportunities to throw the football. TCU does a pretty good job of getting pressure on the quarterback. So I think, can they corral Stetson Bennett? Is he going to be able to be back there creating, making plays? So it's kind of both teams' biggest Achilles to me is defending the quarterback's creativity, and then the big play ability through the air is, I think, going to be something to watch for both these defenses.
Okay, thanks, Kirk. We'll go to Paul next, followed by Charlie Kraus. Go ahead, Paul.
Hi, Kirk. Appreciate your time. I was going to ask you about Dykes, but you did a great job laying out, just how historic his first season was. So I have two quick ones for you. One, can you speak to TCU being the, first Texas team to, one, make the playoff, and two, make the playoff national championship game? And then two, I know you're really good friends with Pat McAfee, and you love to go on a show a lot. Just what has he brought from a chemistry standpoint, and what has he added to that College Game Day show throughout the season from your perspective?
Paul, I never even thought about TCU being the first team, in this playoff era to make a run here. But yeah. I mean, you would think about obviously the high profile schools that get all the 5-star guys, and you would think that they would be the teams that would be out front. And here's TCU. I think it's great. I mean, we've been around the TCU program, seems like, for a long, long time, since the Mountain West days, and watched them, really build that program up and see what it was capable of doing. Man, I remember doing a TCU game when LT was there. They were playing Southern Miss in the GMAC Bowl. I've watched them take it from here all the way up, and then I saw him kind of come back down with Gary, and because I love Gary and I love that program. I love the town. It's just one of those places you enjoy. So I've always kind of pulled for them. But to see them here, I'm sure you covering them, you can't believe it yourself. Just to watch these guys make this run. I think this would have been 8-4 would have been a great year this year to me, after where they were last year. And to think that in that state where football means everything, and the amount of money that these other programs put into their programs, and think that they're going to be the one. It's funny how culture and chemistry and love and belief, all those old school principles for this TCU team, they really matter. And to the point where they made a run all the way to an undefeated season, a bit, or not undefeated season, into the Big 12 championship, and then an opportunity to play in the national title. So it's been fantastic. But it is crazy to think the first team in the state of Texas. As far as Pat, this is my 27th year on the show. I love all the guys on our show. We're very lucky that we have great chemistry. Lee Corso is, he and I have been together for so long. He means everything to me. Everybody on that show does. I've gotten to know Pat before he came on this year. I would kid him about, when are you going to come over and join us for real? And he's back and forth. And then they evidently got things worked out. And I can just tell you, he's a rowdy, fun guy, jumping into the water and all that kind of stuff. But that guy has a genuine heart of gratitude. He is a very humble guy. I think people lose what his heart is about because of how wild he is. But he's a great teammate. He's incredibly respectful of the Game Day brand, almost to a fault, because he grew up watching it and just kind of appreciating what that show has done in the sport for a long time. And so he kind of had his hat in his hand when he came into these meetings and to join the show. And I think that's pretty genuine of him. And off the air with me, he's been a game changer. He's been like an energizer bunny for me personally in my 27th year, especially with the schedule that I had, not sleeping a lot and to just be around him, as you can tell, that's how he is off the air. So for me to be around that energy was reinvigorating for me in my personal career on College Game Day. I can't thank him enough for what he brought to the show on the air, but also what he brought to the show off the air, and just hanging out and vibing with him. Hopefully he's a part of that show for a long time.
Real quick before I let you go, I know you're a big sports trivia guy, and I wanted to see if you knew this. Dykes is one of 3 coaches since national championship games have been played since '92 to make the title game in their first season. Can you name the other 2?
Oh my gosh. Well, I remember
one is won and one is lost.
There are a lot of guys that were in their second year, lots of them, like Chiswick and Stoops and Tressel. All those guys were in their second year. Since you went back to '92, I don't know, was Gene Stallings in his first year in '92?
The 2 are Larry Coker, 2001 Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah.
That really good team he took over from Butch Davis.
Oh,
and then
man,
the other one was 2013 Tigers with Gus Malzahn.
Wow. That's great stuff.
And so he's the only one that has turned around a losing record, him and Dykes.
That's fantastic. And did Gus win? I can't remember in 13.
They lost to
Florida State. Florida State. Jameis drove down late. That's right.
I just wanted to throw that out there for you. I know you're like a sports trivia key, so
man, you got me. Yeah, Larry Coker, boy, he inherited a pretty good situation there in 01, didn't he?
One would you'd say so, huh?
Yeah, that Miami team is as good a team as I've seen maybe ever in 01.
Great stuff, Paul. Thank you.
See you, man.
All right, we'll go to Charlie and then we'll go to Jen Lewis. Go ahead, Charlie.
Hey, Kurt. Just wanted to touch base with you as a quarterback and you in the role of the color commentary still. And I think you just said 27 years later, however long you've been doing it. Do you still find yourself reading the defenses as they break their huddle? And then do you try not to talk over, let's just say Chris, and because you see what they're doing and want to share your knowledge and experience? And if you just don't mind elaborating on how you watch the game.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, Mike Tirico, when I first started doing games, I was lucky enough to be with Mike Tirico and a producer named Tim Corrigan. And I was in my 20s and I'd never called a high school game, let alone calling a game on a Thursday night on ESPN. And Mike and Tim, they just said, listen, all we want you to do is tell us how or why the play unfolded. That's just stay in that lane. That's all we want you to really think about to help the viewer watch the game. And so that's kind of how I started. I'm not really big on interrupting the play-by-play guy. As a fan, when I sit on a couch and I watch the game, if I'm watching, local telecasts or radio, I don't mind the guy in the background yelling, if it's a local game. I think that's kind of fun and it provides some passion. But if you're doing a national game, it's just the way my personal preference. I like to give the play-by-play guy his time and his lane to set the scene, to call the game. If you ever notice when a touchdown, especially if it's a home team scores a touchdown, I immediately lay out, not because I'm happy or I'm sad or whatever. It's more of I lay out so our director can cut shots and show the emotion of the game. And then either right before the extra point or right after the extra point, we might hit a replay and kind of talk about what just happened on that touchdown. But because I've done it for so many years, I'm so tuned in to not just my role as an analyst. I'm tuned into the play-by-play guy. I'm thinking about the director. I'm thinking about everybody because I don't want to get in the way of anybody in doing their job and trying to make it the better broadcast that we can. So no, I try to a fault of not getting in the way of Al or Chris or anybody I've ever worked with. But yeah, to answer your question, I'm right away as soon as the huddle breaks, if there is a huddle, I'm looking at the safeties. I'm seeing if the corners have depth, if they bring in a blitz. You know, I'm looking at it. And then, because if you think about it, Charlie, I have, I don't know, 6 seconds to think of a thought and about 8 seconds or 10 seconds to say that thought for 3.5 or 4 hours. And so anything I can do before the snap to help me understand analytically and schematically what just happened, and then to try to say it in layman's terms so my mom can understand or my wife can understand. That's the other thing, is I'm not going to say 3 technique or inverted safety or too high shell. Like, if I say anything that's football terms, I always try to follow it up with what I mean by that. Just because I think so many people don't really understand what some of those terms are. So I try to do it in a way that a coach can understand and enjoy it. And also someone who doesn't understand it can hopefully learn something and enjoy watching the game. But I definitely want to stay out of the way. That's for sure.
All right, we're going to do 2 more last questions and then finish up. We'll go to Jen, followed by Katrina. Go ahead, Jen. I think you're on mute. Oops.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
And thank you for taking my question today, Kirk. Jen Lewis,
Sure.
Sideline Sports. I was just wondering, who do you think will be the quiet game changers on Monday night's game? Maybe some guys who haven't made a big splash thus far for both TCU and Georgia. And thank you.
I will say, that probably Adonai Mitchell for Georgia, wide receiver number 5, who has the potential at any moment now that he's healthy to make a play. And I'm going to say Imari, I think it's DeMarcado, right? DeMarcado 3.
Okay.
He's the backup back who obviously has had a great year. He's averaged almost 6 yards a carry. So I think DeMarcado and Mitchell, I think, have the best chance to kind of, like, I don't want to say off the radar, but guys that maybe don't always have their opportunity to be the showcase name. With Miller's potential injury, hopefully he's good to go.
Right.
But when he didn't play as well because of the injury last week, it opened up the door for DeMarcado, and he obviously stepped up, had a big game. I think he had 150 yards last week. So those would be the 2 I would say.
Right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Jen. All right, Katrina, why don't you finish this up, please?
Kirk, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for being here. I know you had touched on the experience that you've had with Al Michaels up in the broadcast booth, and I wanted to kind of ask you, what's that experience been like for you? What maybe feels different from a college booth to an NFL booth? And you said, you said he's one of the greatest that have ever done this game. What's that been like? What's that experience been like for you?
Man, I appreciate the question. I in my career, I've worked with Mike Tirico, and then I worked with Brent Musburger, and then Chris Fowler, and now Al Michaels. And, it was very similar when I first started to work with Brent Musburger, because when I was 8 or 9 years old, I watched Brent Musburger, on the NFL Today show. And now here I am standing right next to him, hearing him say, "You're looking live." And I was, I'd get chills when he would say that in a big game we were getting ready to do. So I had to pinch myself when I first started to work with Brent. And with Al Michaels, I go all the way back to the Olympics, like everybody else, when he said, "Do you believe in miracles?" And I was about 11 years old when he did that. And then I watched his career all the way through the Olympics, and obviously Monday Night Football and Super Bowls, and Monday night, doing World Series, Monday Night Baseball with Jim Palmer. Just a huge fan of his, and I love his voice. And now here I am standing next to him. So it was quite a moment, even though I've been around for a number of years now. It was still, oh my gosh, I'm working with Al Michaels, and I'm not shy to tell him that. I tell him that all the time, just because I have I'm just my generation. I feel like I have a great deal of gratitude and appreciation for the people that came before me And I've just been lucky enough to work with some of the best to ever do it. And so, you know, Lee Corso, I would throw in there as well as a guy that is a mentor of mine and somebody that I've been with for a long time. So I try to learn as much as I can from all these people that I work with. You know, calling the NFL was a big enough challenge, especially in the schedule that I had. But when they put me with Al Michaels, I worked even more to another level of prep because I didn't want to let him down, or I didn't want him to think that I couldn't do it. And so I felt it internally an immense amount of pressure to deliver, not just for my job with Amazon, but for Al Michaels, because I wanted him to feel good about what we were doing. And, you know, hopefully I did okay. But yeah, it was an incredible experience, and looking forward to working with him for a number of years, you know, and calling those games on Thursday night.
Are you happy with your performance from this season?
Yeah, I'm happy I survived it. I was confident that I could do it. I'm a big prep guy, so the amount of prep that I did this year is unprecedented for me. And at the end, it's almost like asking Sonny Dykes or Kirby Smart if they're happy with what they've done. It's like I almost can't step out of this world that I've been in of preparation to even look to see if I feel good about it, because it's like I'm on best way to describe it, Katrina, is like I'm on a treadmill, not at 7 miles an hour, but like at 15, you know, and I can't really get off of it until Monday at about midnight Eastern. I'll step off that treadmill and it won't go down to 7, it'll go to 0, because everything stops for me at midnight on Monday night. And then I'll have a chance to kind of unwind and kind of look back and see how things went. I felt really good about it. I hope people enjoyed it. I tried to make it you know, a good experience, you know, and I think learning the NFL this year was a lot of fun for me. And hopefully there'll be many more years for me, you know, doing games at that level.
Thanks for the question, Katrina. That's a good one to end on. I think when Kirk signs off Monday night, he will have done 15 NFL games, I believe 18 college football games, and 16 game days this year. So quite a run over the last 4 months. And we appreciate your time today, Kirk.
You got it.